One of the new breed of plastics for mid-war from Battlefront is the M3 Grant medium tank. This kit is included as part of the El Alamein starter set, the Monty's Desert Rats box, and is now available as a Grant Armoured Troop box set. It's also due for release for the Tank Skirmish game. Let's have a look at this kit. The Grant comes on a single sprue of yellow plastic. You can see there's a lot of parts here with some nice options and alternatives. For example, there are two 75mm guns here, a long and short barreled version. Neither has counterweights. The shorter gun is the M2 at 31 calibers long. This was fitted to early M3 Lee and Grants, while the longer 40 caliber M3 75mm gun was fitted to later M3s. The M3 gun was the same gun later used in the M4 Sherman. So Grants and early production M3 tanks should use the shorter gun, while later US M3s and late M3 Lees supplied to the British can be built with the longer gun. The 75mm gun can be assembled so it can be traversed left or right, but not in elevation. If you don't like this feature, you can glue it in place. It's nice to have the option. There are also two turret options here, the smaller Lee turret and the larger British Grant turret. I had been concerned there might be only one 37mm gun, but two slightly different versions are supplied. This means there are enough parts to build both turrets, meaning both versions can be fielded from this kit, just with a turret swap. This is a nice touch. Commander's hatches can be posed open or closed. The hull has bold, oversized detail. This means things like rivet detail are maybe a bit out of scale, but should show up well when painted. This somewhat heroic proportion of some detail is a common theme of the new Battlefront plastics. The kit has separate side skirts so it can be built with or without. British tanks generally used them, many US tanks had them removed. Tracks are one-piece designs with good detail. They have the characteristic M3 bogies with the return roller located directly above the volute springs. This was changed to a trailing roller assembly in the M4. As is common practice with Battlefront plastics now, the hull and tracks are keyed so they can't be assembled the wrong way. Tracks are the simple but common square rubber block type. The sprue also has some stowage boxes and rolled tarps. Generally, detail is good and the mouldings are crisp. This kit should look great built up. Let's get on with it. Battlefront have a good assembly video on YouTube and a step-by-step assembly guide on their website, so this is an inbox rather than a build review. If you want to see the Battlefront construction guides, the URLs are on screen and I'll put them in the description below. Here's the completed kit. I've assembled it as a Grant with the shorter 75mm gun option. The kit went together well and looks fantastic. The gun barrels here are not as oversized as the Crusader or new plastic Panzer kits. This is okay for the 75mm, but the 37mm model to scale is a bit delicate. Take some care with this on the tabletop to avoid breakage. Here's the same kit with the Lee turret. Having enough parts to build two complete turrets makes this a very flexible kit. The quality here really shows how far Battlefront plastics have come. These superb and well-engineered little kits are a long way from the rudimentary open-fire Shermans of just a few years ago. Let's look at the history of the Grant. After losing most of its armoured force in the Battle of France, Britain turned to the United States to supply tanks. Unwilling to build British designs, America offered to sell them the M3 medium tank then in development. The M3 medium was armed with a 75mm low-velocity gun in the hull and a 37mm gun in a small turret. There were also a number of machine guns, including a coupler on the turret and two fixed forward-firing guns in the hull. This tank was a stopgap design pending the development of the M4 Sherman. The M3, called the Lee by the British, had some shortcomings. At this stage, American industry wasn't able to manufacture a turret large enough to take the 75mm gun. The hull-mounted gun had limited traverse and meant the tank couldn't fight from cover like a turreted design. It was also a very tall tank, in part due to using a Wright Continental radial aircraft engine as a power plant. The armour was of riveted construction, and hits by enemy fire could cause rivets to break and ricochet around the fighting compartment. However, it was well armoured, automotively reliable, and the 75mm gun had good range and firepower. The M3 was first used by the British in North Africa in 1942. It completely outclassed the Italian armour in the theatre, and made a good showing against German Panzer IIIs and IVs. The British had asked for some modifications, including a redesigned larger turret with room to mount the Mark 19 radio set. This eliminated the radio operator, reducing the crew from 7 men to 6. The British had a tradition of naming US tanks after American generals, and they called this M3 variant the Grant. After this initial order, the British also received standard production M3 tanks under Lend-Lease. They called this version with the US turret the Lee, and British forces in North Africa operated both Lee and Grant types. Despite its shortcomings, the M3 was popular in the desert. Less capable British designs like the Crusader were withdrawn as suitable stocks of M3 and later M4 tanks became available. The new tanks made an impact. Rommel said, "Up to May of 1942 our tanks had in general been superior in quality to the corresponding British types. This is now no longer true, at least not to the same extent." However, the M3 was vulnerable to the 8.8 cm flat gun, and later German tanks introduced the long 5 cm and long 7.5 cm guns. M3 Lee and Grant served for the remainder of the North African campaign. However, they were gradually replaced in front-line duties by the M4 Sherman. Some specialist vehicles like the M31 Armoured Recovery Vehicle and Canal Defence Lights served in northwest Europe. The M3 continued to serve with British forces as a gun tank in the Far East until 1945. Russia received stocks of the M3 medium tank but were not impressed, nicknaming it a grave for 6. This nickname is also sometimes expressed as a grave for 7 brothers. Australia also received M3s from surplus British stocks. These were mainly used for training and home defence. The Australian Army determined the M3 was unfit for overseas service, and instead used Matilda IIs in the jungle fighting in New Guinea and Borneo. Let's take a look at using the Grant in Flames of War. Here's the 4th edition vehicle card for a Grant Armoured Troop. The Grant Troop is a tank unit. They're listed as careful, so Grants are hit on a 4+. Their motivation is confident, so they're 4+, but they have the Fight Another Day special rule which gives Grants a last stand of 5+, so expect Grant units to buckle under pressure. However, the Grant has protected ammo, so the remount is 3+. This will make it a bit easier to rally bailed out crews. Their skill rating is trained, so a 4+ here. This includes for tactics roles as they don't get the tally-ho rule. This reflects that the heavier Grants use more measured tactics than the lighter, faster cruiser tanks. The rationale behind the traits of the new 4th edition British units are explained in detail in the Desert Rats design notes. Armoured protection is pretty good. Front armour is 5, side is 4 and top armour is 1. Grant is a heavier tank, so tactical move is 10 inches or 25 centimetres, terrain dash is 12 inches or 30 centimetres, cross-country dash is 18 inches or 45 centimetres, and road dash is 20 inches or 50 centimetres. Grant is a lumbering beast and crosses are 4+. This might mean players will want to use cross-here movement orders to get them across difficult terrain. This reduces the cross number by 1 as they follow the unit leader through the terrain, but remember that units using this order then can't shoot or assault. Let's look at the weapons. The 75mm hull-mounted gun has a range of 24 inches or 60 centimetres, a halted rate of fire of 2, and moving of 1. Anti-tank is 9, pretty good for mid-war, with a good 3+ firepower. Special rules are forward firing and smoke. Forward firing means the weapon can only hit targets fully in front of the firing team. Smoke means the Grant can use the 75mm to fire smoke ammunition, a handy ability if used well. The Grant also has the turret-mounted 37mm gun. This also has a range of 24 inches or 60 centimetres, halted rate of fire of 2 and moving of 1. Anti-tank is 7 with a 4+ firepower. The 37mm gun has secondary weapon. This means the 37mm can be fired at the same time as the 75mm gun, at the same or a different target. If used this way, the rate of fire is 1 and there's a +1 to hit. Grant also has a coaxial machine gun with a rate of fire of 3, anti-tank of 2 and a firepower of 6. So the Grant is a heavier and more well-protected tank than British cruisers in the desert. These have the firepower and armour to go toe-to-toe with German tanks in a way that Crusaders just can't. The extra protection means Grants are slow. British players can use this, with Grants fixing enemy tanks in a stand-up fight, while the more nimble cruisers try to manoeuvre for flank shots. Having both the hull gun and turret gun firing adds that little bit extra firepower. The 37mm is also useful for dealing with other threats like soft skins, lighter armour, infantry or guns. Without the Grant, the British desert forces would be outclassed by later German tanks. This utility is reflected in their points. A Grant Armoured Troop of 3 Grants is 18 points. Despite all the design limitations, Grants are the cornerstone of British Desert Forces. The extra capability and protection are well worth the points, and these can be tactically teamed with speedier, lower-cost Crusaders and Honeys. This is a great little kit. Thanks to Battlefront for supplying this review kit.